I'm standing at my security monitor right now watching my parents and sister shiver outside my gate. And I need to tell you how we got here because this has been the most satisfying year of my entire life. Last December, I was 27 and running my own consulting business. Not some corporate job with a fancy title, not pulling six figures yet, just me grinding it out, helping small businesses with their operations and logistics. I was making decent money, paying my bills, building something real. But to my family, I might as well have been unemployed and living in a dumpster. See, my dad, Lloyd, worked in upper management at a manufacturing company for 30 years. My mom, Melanie, married into that life and spent 3 decades bragging about their status at country club events. My sister, Scarlett, landed some mid-level marketing position at a tech company right out of college and acted like she'd personally invented the internet. Their whole world revolved around job titles, salaries, and what they could brag about to their friends. I'd been listening to their garbage for years. Every family gathering was the same. Lloyd would ask about my business with this condescending smirk, like he was asking a kid about their lemonade stand. Melanie would sigh dramatically and tell me about her friend's son who just made partner at some law firm. Scarlett would literally pull up her Instagram in front of me to show off her latest work trip or expensive restaurant, just to make sure I saw what real success looked like. But here's the thing, I was actually doing okay. My client list was growing. I had enough saved up. I was building something sustainable, just not flashy enough for them. Last Christmas, I hadn't seen them since Thanksgiving, where Lloyd spent the entire dinner explaining why entrepreneurs without MBA degrees were basically just gambling with their futures. I figured the holidays might be different, Christmas spirit and all that garbage. So, I decided to surprise them. I lived about 6 hours away. The weather forecast showed a massive storm system moving in, but I thought I could beat it. Started driving at 5 a.m. on Christmas Eve. By hour 3, the snow was coming down hard. By hour 5, I could barely see the road. The highways were a mess, cars and ditches everywhere. But I kept going because I genuinely thought my family would be happy to see me. I pulled up to their house around 2 p.m. The driveway was packed with cars, Christmas lights everywhere. Clearly a big party happening inside. I grabbed the gifts I'd brought, walked through the snow to the front door and knocked. My mom opened it. She looked at me standing there covered in snow holding presents. And I swear to God, I will never forget the expression on her face. She didn't smile. She didn't look surprised or happy. She laughed. Not a little chuckle. A full loud laugh. Then she turned back into the house and yelled for everyone to come look. The failure's here. Everyone come look. I stood there frozen. And I don't mean from the cold. My dad appeared behind her. Lloyd looked me up and down, stepped forward, and literally blocked the doorway with his body. He told me they were having a successful people's party. No losers allowed, just said it straight to my face like I was something disgusting on his shoe. Then Scarlett showed up with her phone out, already recording. She was filming me standing there shivering with snow in my hair, holding Christmas presents like an idiot. She started laughing too, saying this was hilarious. Asking if I drove all that way just to embarrass myself. She posted it to her Instagram story right there. I could see her doing it. More family members crowded behind them. Aunts, uncles, cousins I'd grown up with. All of them were watching and laughing. My Uncle Ross actually suggested I try the soup kitchen down the street since I probably couldn't afford a real Christmas dinner. My Aunt Imagigen said maybe standing in the cold would motivate me to get a real job like normal people. I tried to speak, tried to say something, anything. But Lloyd cut me off. He said I was an embarrassment to the family, that they'd invited successful people to this party, people with real careers and real futures, that I should have known better than to show up. Then Melanie added that maybe freezing outside would teach me something about the real world. They made me stand there for what felt like forever while they took turns saying things through the doorway. Scarlett kept filming. The whole family was pressed against the windows watching and laughing. The temperature was dropping. Had to be -30 with the wind chill. My hands were going numb. Snow kept falling. Finally, Lloyd told me to leave before I ruined everyone's good time. Then he shut the door. Actually slammed it in my face. I stood there for maybe 30 seconds just staring at that closed door. Then I walked back to my car, put the presents in the back seat, and drove away. 6 hours back through the blizzard. Didn't stop, didn't cry, didn't call anyone, just drove in complete silence. That drive changed everything. I had 6 hours to sit with what had just happened. 6 hours to replay every second. 6 hours to realize that these people, my own family, saw me as something to mock and humiliate. Not because I'd done anything wrong. Not because I was failing, but because I wasn't successful in the specific way they valued. And you know what happened during those 6 hours? The anger set in. Not the hot, explosive kind, the cold, calculating kind. The kind that makes you see everything clearly. I got home around 8 p.m. Christmas Eve. Sat in my apartment, started making plans. See, my business was growing. I'd been conservative, careful, building slowly, but I had this opportunity, this major client who'd been interested in bringing me on for a huge project. Corporate restructuring for a regional company with multiple locations. It would mean longer hours, more stress, but also serious money and serious connections. I'd been hesitant because I liked my work-life balance. But sitting there on Christmas Eve, I made the decision. I was taking that project and every other opportunity that came my way, not because I loved the work, not because I cared about success the way they defined it, but because I was going to make absolutely certain that when they inevitably came crawling back, I'd be in a position to watch them squirm. I spent that entire year working. The project was massive, went better than expected, led to 3 more clients. I hired 2 people to help. Revenue tripled. By summer, I'd made more money than Lloyd made in a good year. By fall, I'd bought property, a nice place, gated security system, everything. I didn't reach out to them once. Blocked Scarlett on everything after I saw she'd kept that video up on her Instagram. Kept reposting it with captions about family disappointments and people who don't know their place. Changed my number. Made sure they had no way to contact me, but I knew they'd try eventually. People like that always do, and I knew exactly what I'd do when they did. 3 days ago, my security system alerted me to people at the gate. I pulled up the camera feed on my phone. There they were. Lloyd, Melanie, and Scarlett, standing in the cold, looking rough. Really rough. Lloyd's fancy car was gone. They'd showed up in some old sedan. Melanie's designer coat from last year was missing. Just a regular winter jacket. Scarlett wasn't filming anything, just standing there looking miserable. They rang the intercom. Lloyd's voice came through asking if I was home, saying they'd been trying to reach me, that they needed to talk. I didn't answer. Just watched the cameras. They stood there for an hour, then 2, then 3. It got dark, temperature dropped. They went back to their car to warm up, then came back to the gate, rang the intercom again. Melanie this time, saying please. Saying they were sorry, saying they had nowhere else to go. I still didn't answer. By hour 5, they were taking turns standing by the intercom. Scarlett tried next. Said she was sorry for what happened at Christmas. Said she deleted the video. Said they really needed help. Said I was their only hope. That's when I finally pressed the button and spoke. I asked them if standing in the cold was motivating them to do better. Asked if this was teaching them something about the real world. The silence on their end was beautiful. Then Lloyd started talking fast, saying they'd made a mistake, saying things had changed, saying they needed to discuss something important. Melanie was crying. I could hear it over the intercom. Scarlett just kept saying please over and over. I told them I'd think about it and turned off the intercom. They stayed another hour before finally leaving. That was 3 days ago. They'd been back every single day since. This morning, they showed up at 7 a.m. It's now 4 p.m. and they're still there. 7 hours in the cold. And I'm sitting here in my warm house watching them on my security monitor, drinking coffee, and planning exactly what comes next. Because here's what you need to understand. I spent a year getting ready for this moment. A year building up everything I'd need. A year making sure I'd have every advantage when they finally came begging. And they will beg. They already are. See, I've done some research. Lloyd got laid off 8 months ago. The manufacturing company he worked for downsized. And at 58, he's been finding out that upper management positions don't grow on trees. Melanie's country club memberships got canceled when they couldn't pay the dues. Scarlett's tech company did layoffs too. And turns out her mid-level marketing position wasn't as secure as she thought. They're about to lose their house. Mortgage payments haven't been made in 4 months. Bank is moving forward with foreclosure. All that equity they'd built up over 30 years. Gone because Lloyd made some terrible investment decisions trying to stay wealthy. And now they're drowning. They need money. A lot of it fast. And apparently I'm the only family member who has it. The irony is so perfect it almost hurts. But I'm not giving them anything. At least not yet. Not until they understand exactly what they did. Not until they feel every bit of what they made me feel standing outside their door in a blizzard. Not until they realize that the failure they mocked is now the only thing standing between them and complete ruin. Tomorrow they'll be back at my gate. And tomorrow I'm going to start having some conversations with them through the intercom. Of course, I'm not opening my gate yet. Not even close. This is just the beginning of what I have planned. They wanted to teach me about motivation in the real world. Well, class is in session and I'm a very dedicated teacher. I'll update you all once things start really moving because trust me, they will. Update 1. Okay, so you guys have been asking for an update and holy hell do I have one for you. Shout out to everyone who said to make them sweat. You were absolutely right. This has been the most vindicating week of my life. When I posted 3 days ago, they'd been at my gate for about 7 hours that day. Well, they came back the next morning at 6 a.m. and the morning after that and every single day since. We are now on day 7 of them showing up like clockwork, standing in the freezing cold, begging through my intercom. But here's where it gets interesting. Yesterday, I finally decided to actually engage. Not because I felt bad, God no, but because I needed to hear them try to explain themselves. Needed to understand exactly how they were going to spin what they did to me. So yesterday morning when they showed up, I pressed the intercom button. Lloyd started talking immediately like he'd been rehearsing. He launched into this whole speech about how the manufacturing company betrayed him after all his years of service, how the economy had changed, how things had been difficult. He went on for maybe 5 minutes about their problems. Never once mentioned Christmas, never once mentioned what they did. I let him finish. Then I asked him if he remembered last December. You could actually hear him pause. Then he started saying something about how that was a difficult time for everyone. How emotions were running high. How maybe things got out of hand. Got out of hand. That's what he called it. I asked him to be specific. Tell me exactly what got out of hand. Melanie jumped in then, her voice all shaky, saying they'd made some mistakes in how they communicated. Mistakes in how they communicated. Like they'd accidentally used the wrong tone in an email or something. I told them I'd driven 6 hours through a blizzard, that I'd brought presents, that I'd wanted to spend Christmas with my family, and I asked them what exactly Melanie had said when she opened the door. The silence was incredible. Finally, Scarlett spoke up. She said they were all stressed that day, that they'd been drinking, that things came out wrong. She actually tried to claim they were joking. That calling me a failure and making me stand in -30 weather while they laughed was just family banter that I took too seriously. I swear I almost opened the gate right then just to strangle her, but I stayed calm. I asked Lloyd to repeat what he'd said about the successful people's party. Asked Melanie to explain why freezing might motivate me. Asked Scarlett why she filmed it and put it on Instagram if it was just a joke. Lloyd tried to redirect. Started saying they'd been wrong, that they acknowledged that, but right now they really needed family to come together, that this was bigger than past disagreements, that they were in serious trouble, and I was the only one who could help. And here's where I started applying pressure. I told them I'd help. Absolutely, I'd be happy to help. But first, I wanted to understand their situation completely. Wanted to know every detail of how they'd ended up here. Because, you see, I'm a business consultant. I solve problems for people, and I needed to fully understand their problem before I could offer solutions. Lloyd perked up at that. You could hear the hope in his voice. He started explaining. The layoff happened in April. He'd gotten a severance package, but it wasn't as much as he'd expected. He'd been applying for positions, but nothing at his level was available. Melanie hadn't worked in 30 years, no recent experience. They'd been living off savings and Scarlett's income. Then Scarlett got laid off in August. Suddenly, they had no income at all. They'd already been behind on the mortgage. The bank had started foreclosure proceedings in September. They tried to sell, but the market was slow, and they owed more than the house was worth now because of a home equity loan Lloyd had taken out 2 years ago for renovations. I asked what the loan had been for specifically. Lloyd got defensive, said it was for necessary updates to maintain property value. Melanie jumped in saying they'd redone the kitchen and added a new deck because all their friends had nice houses and they couldn't be the only ones with an outdated home. So, they'd borrowed against their house to keep up appearances. Beautiful. I asked how much they needed. Lloyd said if they could get $60,000 immediately, they could catch up on the mortgage and have a few months to find employment. $60,000 just like that. I told them I'd think about it. Lloyd started protesting, saying they needed an answer now, that the foreclosure was moving fast. I cut him off, told him he'd made me stand outside for hours while my hands went numb, so he could stand at my gate a little longer while I considered things. Then I turned off the intercom. They stayed for 6 more hours yesterday. I watched them on the cameras. They kept trying the intercom. Melanie was crying openly. Scarlett looked furious. Lloyd kept pacing. It was fascinating. But here's where things got more complicated. Because this morning someone else showed up at my gate. Uncle Ross. Remember him? The one who suggested I try the soup kitchen at that Christmas party. Yeah, that Ross. He showed up around 10 a.m. while Lloyd and Melanie and Scarlett were already there. I watched on the cameras as he pulled up, got out of his car, and walked over to them. They all started talking. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but the body language was intense. Lots of gesturing. Scarlett was pointing at my house. Ross kept shaking his head. Then Ross came to the intercom by himself, asked if I was home, said he needed to talk to me about my parents, said he understood there had been some family drama, but this had gone too far. I asked him what exactly had gone too far. He said that refusing to help family in crisis was wrong. That whatever issues we had, I needed to put them aside because Lloyd and Melanie were genuinely desperate, that family takes care of family. I asked Ross if he remembered what he said to me last Christmas. He got quiet. Then he said something about how everyone says things they regret. But that was almost a year ago and I needed to move past it. Move past it? Sure. Let me just move past being humiliated by my entire family. I asked Ross if he'd offered to help Lloyd and Melanie with their financial situation. He said he'd done what he could, but he didn't have the kind of money they needed. His business had struggled too. He'd already lent them $5,000 months ago that they'd burned through. Then he said something that made me see red. He said that I'd clearly done well for myself, that I'd obviously proven whatever point I was trying to prove, and now it was time to be the bigger person. The bigger person. I told Ross that being the bigger person was interesting advice coming from someone who suggested I go to a soup kitchen. I asked him if he thought I should be the bigger person back then, too, when he was laughing with everyone else. He started saying that was different, that times were hard now, that people needed help, so when they need help, I should provide it. But when I needed basic human decency, that was just jokes and I should toughen up. Got it. I told Ross to leave. He refused. Said he wasn't going anywhere until I agreed to talk to Lloyd and Melanie properly. Said I was acting like a child holding a grudge while real adults were suffering real consequences. And here's where I made my first major move. I told Ross and everyone at the gate that I'd meet with them face to face. Not at my house. I'm not opening these gates yet, but I'd meet them somewhere public where we could have a proper conversation about their situation. Lloyd immediately agreed. Asked where and when. I told them I'd text the details to Scarlett's phone later today since she'd so helpfully filmed me last Christmas. I figured she'd remember my number from when we were still in contact. Then I specified one condition. I wanted everyone who was at that Christmas party to come to this meeting. All the family members who laughed and made comments while I froze outside. If they wanted my help, they needed to be there because we were going to discuss not just their financial situation, but exactly what happened that day and why I should care about any of them. Now, you could see the panic on their faces through the camera. Scarlett started saying that wasn't necessary, that it was just between us. Lloyd said bringing everyone into it would be humiliating, and I asked him if being humiliated in front of family was unpleasant, if maybe it made you feel small and worthless, If maybe it stayed with you. Melanie actually started apologizing then, real apologies, saying she was sorry, that what they did was cruel, that she understood why I was angry, but she kept adding that they were desperate, that they might lose everything, that they needed me to forgive them so we could move forward. And that's when I realized something. They still don't actually get it. They're sorry because they need something from me. They're apologizing because it's strategically necessary, not because they genuinely understand what they did or feel actual remorse, just because their current circumstances require my cooperation. I told them the meeting would be Friday evening at 6 p.m., gave them the address of a chain restaurant about 20 minutes from here. Decent place with a private room I could reserve. Told them to bring everyone from Christmas or don't bother coming at all. Then I ended the conversation and watched them stand there arguing among themselves for another hour before they finally left. And now I'm sitting here planning exactly what I'm going to say at this meeting because I've spent a year thinking about this moment. A year imagining every scenario, a year building up the resources and position to make sure when this happened, I'd have every advantage. See, they think this meeting is about negotiating help. They think if they apologize enough, show enough desperation, maybe bring the family to beg collectively that I'll hand over money and save them. But that's not what this meeting is about at all. This meeting is about making them sit in a room and confront what they did. Making them explain to each other and to me exactly why they thought it was acceptable. Making them face the person they tried to destroy now that he's more successful than any of them. Making them understand that the failure they mocked now holds their entire future in his hands. And then we'll talk about what I might be willing to do for them. Or more accurately, what they're going to have to do to earn even the possibility of my help. Friday is in 2 days. I've got the room reserved. I've got my plan ready. I've been preparing for this for 12 months. They wanted to teach me about the real world, about what success looks like, about motivation. Class is about to start and attendance is mandatory. I'll update after the meeting. This is going to be good. Update 2. The meeting was Friday night. I'm writing this on Saturday morning because I needed time to process what actually went down. Some of you called it. This went way deeper than I thought. Buckle up because this gets insane. I got to the restaurant early around 5:30, reserved a private room in the back, the kind with glass walls so staff could see in, but it was separate from the main dining area, ordered a coffee, and waited. They started arriving at 5:50. Lloyd and Melanie came first, looking worse than they had at my gate. Lloyd had this defeated posture I'd never seen before. Melanie's hair wasn't done the way she usually obsessed over. Scarlett came in right after them, glaring at me through the glass before they even entered the room. Then Uncle Ross with his wife Imagigen. Then 2 cousins, Brad and his sister, who I hadn't seen in years. By 6:10, everyone who'd been at that Christmas party was sitting around this table, 8 people total, all of them looking uncomfortable as hell. I let them sit in silence for a solid minute. Just sipped my coffee and looked at each of them. Lloyd kept clearing his throat like he was going to speak, but I held up my hand. When I was ready, I started. I told them we were here to discuss 2 things. First, what happened last Christmas and why each of them participated. Second, what they expected from me. Now, I said I wanted to hear from every single person in the room, their perspective on that day, their justification, because I was genuinely curious how 8 grown adults convinced themselves it was acceptable to treat family that way. Lloyd jumped in immediately. Started with the same excuses about stress and emotions running high, but I cut him off. Told him I didn't want generic explanations. I wanted the real reason. Why specifically did they hate seeing me succeed on my own terms so much that they had to destroy me? That's when Melanie spoke up, and what she said actually shocked me. She said it was because I reminded Lloyd of his own father. That Lloyd's dad had been a small business owner who never made much money. And Lloyd had spent his whole childhood being embarrassed by it. That Lloyd had worked his entire adult life to be the opposite of his father. Corporate job status stability. And watching me choose the entrepreneurial path, the same path his father took, brought up all this resentment Lloyd had been carrying for decades. Lloyd looked furious that she'd said this, told her to stop talking, but she kept going. Said that when I'd started my consulting business, Lloyd had been terrified I'd fail the way his father did. That every family gathering where I talked about my work was like watching his worst nightmare journeyed out. That he'd convinced himself and her that I was making a massive mistake. So, the mockery wasn't just about status. It was Lloyd projecting his own family trauma onto me. That makes it so much better. I turned to Scarlett, asked her what her excuse was. She got defensive immediately, saying she'd already apologized, that she'd deleted the video. I told her I didn't believe her. Told her to pull out her phone right now and show me her Instagram archive because I knew she'd saved it even if she deleted it publicly. She refused. Said I was being paranoid. So, I pulled out my phone and showed everyone the screenshots I'd taken of her Instagram story that day. She'd posted that video 5 times over the week after Christmas with different captions. One of them said, "Some people just don't understand what success requires." Another said, "Family Disappointment Chronicles." The room went dead silent. Scarlett's face turned red. Ross asked her why the hell she'd done that. She snapped back that it was her social media and she could post what she wanted. That maybe if I'd actually made something of myself, she wouldn't have had content to share. That's when Brad spoke up. "This is my cousin who works in finance." Always bragged about his portfolio. He said Scarlett had done more than just post videos. He said she'd been talking about me to professional contacts, bad-mouthing my business, telling people I was unreliable and unprofessional. Scarlett whipped around and told Brad to shut up, but he didn't. He said he'd heard from 3 different people in the last 6 months that someone had been spreading rumors about my consulting work being shoddy, that I'd lost clients, that I was desperate for business, and he'd traced it back to Scarlett because she'd been telling these stories at networking events, trying to position herself as the successful sibling. I just stared at her, asked her if this was true. She said Brad was exaggerating, that she'd maybe mentioned some concerns to a few people, but it wasn't sabotage. I asked her to define what sabotage would look like then because deliberately damaging my professional reputation to mutual contacts sounded pretty clear to me. Lloyd tried to redirect, saying we were getting off track, that family disagreements happened, but we needed to focus on the current crisis. I told him we were exactly on track, that I needed to understand the full scope of what they'd done before making any decisions about help. That's when Imagigen jumped in. Remember her, Ross' wife? She started saying that maybe I was being too harsh, that families have conflicts, and everyone says things they regret, but holding grudges helped no one. She said she understood I was hurt, but at some point I needed to accept their apologies and move on. I asked Imagine what she'd said to me at Christmas. She claimed she didn't remember saying anything specific, so I reminded her. She'd suggested that maybe freezing outside would teach me about the real world. She'd laughed when Melanie made the failure comment. She'd taken photos with her phone. She got defensive, said she'd been drinking and didn't mean it seriously, that it was just going along with the mood of the party. I asked her if peer pressure was a valid excuse for cruelty when you're 52 years old. She didn't answer. The tension was getting thick. Everyone was looking at each other like they were reassessing who was actually responsible. Brad kept pushing Scarlett about the professional sabotage. Ross was arguing with Imagigen about whether they should have come at all. Lloyd and Melanie were whispering frantically to each other. Then Lloyd made a strategic pivot. He said, "Fine, they'd messed up. They'd all messed up. But that was in the past. The present issue was that they were losing their house. That Melanie and he had nowhere to go. That they'd already exhausted every other option. That they needed $60,000 and they needed it within the next 2 weeks or the foreclosure would be final." I asked what happened after the foreclosure. He said they'd be homeless. They had no savings left, no income, no prospects. Scarlett's apartment was too small to take them in long term. Ross and Imagigen had already said no to them living there because of space issues. They'd be in a shelter or their car. Melanie started crying again. Real tears this time, saying she never imagined her life would end up like this. That they'd worked so hard for so many years and now it was all gone. That she was embarrassed and scared and didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to feel something. Sympathy maybe. But all I could think about was standing in the snow while they laughed. All I could think about was Scarlett ruining my professional reputation for her own ego. All I could think about was Lloyd's decades of projected resentment. I told them I'd consider helping with one condition. They all perked up. Lloyd asked what the condition was. I said they needed to publicly acknowledge what they'd done. All of them. Not just to me, but to everyone who knew about that Christmas. They needed to reach out to every family member, every friend who'd heard their version of events and tell them the truth that they'd humiliated me. That they'd been wrong, that I'd actually been successful and they couldn't handle it. Scarlett immediately refused. Said that was humiliating and unnecessary. I told her that was exactly the point. She'd spent months humiliating me professionally. Now she could experience what that felt like personally. Lloyd said it wasn't fair to tie financial help to public humiliation. I asked him if standing outside in a blizzard while your family mocked you was fair. He went quiet. Then Ross tried a different approach. He said, instead of all this drama, what if they just signed something, a promissory note, an acknowledgement of wrongdoing, whatever I wanted in writing, keep it between us. Resolve this quietly and move forward. I asked Ross why he wanted to keep it quiet. He said because airing family business publicly helped no one. I said it helped me. It helped me make sure everyone who'd heard their stories about the family failure knew exactly who'd actually failed in this situation. Brad actually agreed with me. Said he was tired of covering for everyone's behavior, that the whole family had been toxic for years with the status obsession and the judgment, that maybe public accountability would force people to actually change. Scarlett turned on Brad, then started saying he had no room to talk, that he'd laughed along with everyone else, that he was just trying to look good now. Brad said at least he wasn't actively sabotaging family members' careers for social media content. They started arguing, actually yelling at each other. Ross jumped in defending Scarlett. Imagine snapped at Ross for always taking his niece's side. Melanie begged everyone to stop fighting. Lloyd tried to take control of the conversation, but no one was listening. And I just sat there watching my family completely implode, watching them blame each other, defend themselves, scramble for moral high ground while sitting in a restaurant because I'd summoned them there while they waited for me to decide whether to save them. I let them argue for about 5 minutes. Then I stood up. Everyone stopped and looked at me. I said I'd make my decision by the end of next week. That I needed time to think about whether they were actually capable of change or if they'd just go back to the same patterns once the crisis passed. Lloyd stood up too. Said they didn't have until the end of next week. That the foreclosure was happening in 12 days. That they needed an answer now. That I was playing games while they were losing everything. I told Lloyd that I'd spent 12 months planning for this conversation. That he could wait 12 days for my decision. That if the roles were reversed, he'd be making me wait a lot longer than that. Then I left. Just walked out of that private room through the restaurant, got in my car and drove home. Left them sitting there with the bill for the room rental. But here's where things got interesting. Yesterday morning, I got a text from Brad. He said he needed to talk to me privately, that there was more I should know about what happened. We met at a coffee shop near his office. Brad told me that last January, right after that Christmas incident, Lloyd had contacted one of Brad's business partners, someone who I'd been in preliminary talks with about a potential consulting contract. Lloyd had told this person that I was unreliable, had substance abuse issues, and couldn't be trusted with professional responsibilities. The contract fell through. I'd thought it was just bad timing or budget issues, but it was Lloyd. He deliberately sabotaged a major opportunity because he was so committed to proving I'd fail. Brad only found out about it 6 months ago when the business partner mentioned it casually. Brad hadn't told me because he didn't want to get involved in family drama. But after seeing everything at the restaurant, he realized how deep this went. So it wasn't just mockery. It wasn't just Scarlett's social media campaigns. Lloyd had actively tried to destroy my career at its most vulnerable point, and he'd almost succeeded. I'm sitting here now trying to figure out my next move. They're expecting an answer in 12 days. The foreclosure is real. I verified that they genuinely will lose everything if I don't help. But why would I save people who spent the last year trying to ruin me? Why would I rescue someone who tried to sabotage my biggest opportunity? Why would I reward them for any of this? Some of you are probably thinking I should just walk away. Let the foreclosure happen. Let them face the consequences of their choices. And honestly, that's tempting. But I've spent a year building up to this moment, a year preparing. And just walking away feels incomplete, like letting them off easy. They'd lose the house, sure, but they'd tell themselves and everyone else that it was the economy, bad luck, circumstances beyond their control. They'd never actually confront what they did. No, I need them to understand exactly what this cost them. I need them to see clearly that their actions have direct consequences, that the failure they mocked is now the one deciding their fate. I've got 12 days to figure out exactly how to make that happen. 12 days to craft something that will make sure they never forget this lesson. And I've got some ideas. Oh, do I have ideas? Next update will be after I give them my decision. This is far from over. Final update. The 12 days are up. The foreclosure happened yesterday. And I'm writing this because some of you have been messaging asking what I decided. And honestly, I want this documented. I want the full story out there. So, here's what happened. In those 12 days between the restaurant meeting and yesterday, day 3 after the meeting, Lloyd started showing up at my gate alone. Not with Melanie or Scarlett, just him. He'd come around 7 a.m. before I left for work and stand there trying the intercom. The first morning, I ignored him. The second morning, I answered. He asked if we could talk man-to-man without everyone else involved. Said there were things he needed to explain that he couldn't say in front of the family. I was curious, so I told him to talk. Lloyd started by trying to explain his behavior through his father. Went deeper into what Melanie had mentioned at the restaurant. His dad had owned a small hardware store that barely stayed afloat, and Lloyd had spent his childhood watching his mother stress about money while his father insisted the business would turn around. It never did. They'd lost the store when Lloyd was 16, lost their house 6 months later. He said watching me start a consulting business triggered every fear he'd had buried for 40 years. That he'd convinced himself I was heading for the same failure, and instead of supporting me, he decided to prove himself right to show that his path, corporate stability, traditional success, was the only valid option. I asked him if that justified trying to sabotage my career. He got defensive, said he hadn't sabotaged anything. He just shared concerns with someone. I told him about the contract I'd lost because of his lies about substance abuse. He went silent for a long moment, then admitted he'd made that call, but insisted he'd thought he was protecting that business from a risky decision, protecting them, not destroying me. That's how he justified it in his head. I asked Lloyd why he thought I'd help him now. He said because I'd proven him wrong, that I'd built something successful despite his interference. That maybe his father could have done the same if Lloyd had believed in him instead of resenting him. He actually started crying. Said he'd spent his whole adult life running from his father's failure and had turned into someone worse in the process. It was a good performance, really emotional, almost convincing, but I'd spent a year watching that security footage from Christmas. Hearing Melanie's laughter when she opened the door, a year thinking about Scarlett filming me in the snow, and no amount of psychological explanation made that acceptable. I told Lloyd I'd give him my answer on day 12 as promised. He begged me to decide sooner. Said every day that passed made things worse. I ended the conversation. Day 5, Scarlett showed up. She came at lunchtime, caught me coming back from a client meeting. She'd clearly been waiting because she was parked on the street near my gate. Got out of her car when she saw me approaching and asked if we could talk. I pulled into my driveway, but didn't open the gate, just lowered my window. She walked up and immediately started apologizing. Said she'd been jealous, that her marketing job had been boring and unfulfilling, that she'd felt stuck while watching me build something independent, that tearing me down on social media had made her feel better about her own choices. I asked about the professional sabotage Brad had mentioned. She admitted she'd badmouthed my work to at least 5 different contacts over the past year. Said she'd convinced herself she was just being honest about concerns, but looking back, she realized she'd been actively trying to damage my reputation. Then she said something that actually surprised me. She said our parents had encouraged it. That Lloyd had specifically told her that if people in the business community knew I was unreliable, it would push me toward getting a real job. That Melanie had suggested Scarlett position herself as the successful child in professional circles to help her own career advancement. So, it wasn't just Scarlett being petty. It was a family campaign. Coordinated sabotage dressed up as concern and advice. I asked Scarlett what she expected from me now. She said she knew she didn't deserve forgiveness, but she was asking anyway. That she'd do the public acknowledgement I demanded. That she'd reach out to every person she'd talked to and correct the record. that she'd post a full explanation on her social media, whatever it took. I told her I'd consider it. She started crying. Said she couldn't watch our parents lose everything. That despite everything, they were still family. I asked her if I was still family when she was posting videos of me freezing outside. She didn't have an answer for that. Day 8, Melanie sent me a letter. Actual physical letter delivered to my address somehow. Turns out Scarlett had given her my address. The letter was 6 pages long, handwritten, going through every regret she had. How she'd gotten caught up in Lloyd's obsession with status, how she'd tied her entire identity to his career and their social position, how watching that crumble had made her realize how empty it all was. She wrote about standing at my gate in the cold and understanding for the first time what she'd done to me, about realizing that the son she'd mocked was the only one who'd actually built something real and lasting. She begged me to help them. Not for her and Lloyd, but so they wouldn't burden Scarlett, who was already struggling. The letter was manipulative, but effective. Hit all the emotional points. Talked about family bonds and second chances, and how she'd spend the rest of her life making it up to me if I'd just helped them this once. I read it twice, then filed it away. Day 10, Brad contacted me again, said the family was fracturing, that Ross and Imagigen were refusing to come to Lloyd and Melanie's defense publicly because they didn't want the association, that other extended family members were distancing themselves now that the foreclosure was becoming known. That Lloyd's former colleagues were circulating stories about his layoff and financial problems. The social circle that had meant everything to my parents was completely disintegrating. Everyone who'd been at that Christmas party was now trying to pretend they barely knew Lloyd and Melanie, that they hadn't participated in humiliating me. Brad said he felt guilty, but also relieved that the family's toxic status obsession had poisoned everything for years, and watching it collapse was almost cathartic. He asked what I was planning to do. I told him he'd find out soon. Day 11, Lloyd called my business line, left a voicemail, said the foreclosure was tomorrow unless I acted, that he'd do anything I asked. Public apology, written acknowledgement, cutting ties with family members who wouldn't apologize to me, anything. His voice was desperate in a way I'd never heard before. I didn't call back. Yesterday morning, day 12, I drove to their house, the one they were about to lose. Got there around 9 a.m. Lloyd's old sedan was in the driveway. No other cars. I walked up and knocked. Lloyd answered. He looked terrible. Hadn't shaved in days. Clothes rumpled. He stared at me, then asked if I'd made a decision. I said I had and asked if everyone was home. He called for Melanie and Scarlett. They both appeared within seconds like they'd been waiting nearby. We sat in their living room, the same living room where they'd hosted that Christmas party. I could see the windows they'd pressed against while laughing at me. The front door I'd stood outside of. I told them I'd spent 12 days thinking about their apologies and explanations, that I'd considered the psychological factors, the family history, the genuine desperation they were facing, that I understood they were sorry and scared. Lloyd interrupted, asked if I'd help with the foreclosure. I held up my hand, told him to let me finish. I said that despite understanding all of that, I decided not to give them any money. Not $60,000, not $60, nothing. The room went dead silent. Melanie started crying immediately. Lloyd looked like I'd physically struck him. Scarlett just stared at me. Lloyd asked why I'd bothered coming if I wasn't going to help. I told him I came to tell them in person so they could see my face when I explained my reasoning so there would be no confusion, no room for them to convince themselves I might still change my mind. I said that everything they'd done, the mockery, the sabotage, the professional attacks, those weren't just mistakes or bad judgment. They were deliberate choices made by people who valued status over human decency. And the fact that they only regretted those choices when they needed something from me proved they hadn't actually changed. Melanie tried to argue, said they had changed, that losing everything had taught them what really mattered. I asked her what really mattered. She said family. I asked her where that value was when she was calling me a failure at Christmas. She didn't answer. Lloyd switched tactics. Got angry. Said I was being vindictive and cruel. That I was punishing them beyond what they deserved. That refusing to help when I clearly could was morally wrong. I reminded him that he'd decided who counted as family worthy of help at his successful people's party, that I was simply using his own standards. Scarlett asked what I wanted from them. If not money, then what was the point of all this? I told her the point was making sure they understood cause and effect, that the failure they'd mocked was now watching them fail. That every person who'd heard their stories about me would now hear about how they'd begged me for help, and I'd refused. That their social circle would know, their former colleagues would know. Every family member would know that when they needed help the most, the person they'd humiliated had the power to save them and chose not to. Lloyd stood up, told me to get out of his house while he still had one. I stood up, too, told him he had about 6 hours before the bank took possession, so he might want to start packing. Then I looked at all three of them and said that maybe losing everything would motivate them to do better. That maybe hitting rock bottom would teach them something about the real world. Used their own words from that Christmas. Melanie started screaming at me, called me heartless and cruel, and said I was proving I was exactly the failure they'd always thought I was. That real success meant being big enough to forgive. Scarlett joined in, saying I was destroying what was left of the family over a grudge, that I should be ashamed. I let them yell, didn't respond, just watched them completely lose it. Watched them realize that all their apologizing and explaining and begging had been pointless. That I'd already made my decision before any of it started. Lloyd asked if I'd planned this all along. If the 12 days had been just to torture them. I told him yes, that I'd planned this for exactly a year. That every business decision I'd made, every client I'd taken on, every step I'd taken to improve my position had been with this moment in mind. That I'd known they'd eventually need something from me. Because people who live beyond their means and base their worth on status always fall. And I'd wanted to be in a position of power when it happened. Wanted to be the one deciding their fate the same way they decided I wasn't worthy of basic human kindness. Scarlett asked if I felt good about myself. If this was who I wanted to be. I told her I felt great. That watching them face consequences for their actions was the most satisfying thing I'd experienced in years. Then I left, walked out of that house, got in my car, and drove away while they stood in the doorway watching. Same doorway where they'd blocked me out at Christmas. The foreclosure went through yesterday afternoon. They have 30 days to vacate the property. Lloyd called me last night from Scarlett's phone. I'm guessing because I blocked his number and left a voicemail saying I'd ruined their lives. That they'd never forgive me. That this was beyond vindictive. I saved the voicemail. Might listen to it when I need a pick-me-up. Brad texted me this morning. Said the family is in chaos. That Ross and Imagigen are furious at me for not helping, but also furious at Lloyd and Melanie for putting them in a position where they felt obligated to beg on their behalf. That other family members are choosing sides. That Scarlett is apparently having a breakdown because she can't afford to support their parents long-term on her reduced income after being laid off. The whole family structure is collapsing. Everyone's turning on each other. The status hierarchy they'd all bought into is completely destroyed because the people at the top fell and took everyone's illusions with them. And I'm sitting here in my house that I bought with the success they said I'd never achieve watching the security footage of them at my gate from 2 weeks ago. And I genuinely have no regrets. Some of you will probably say I went too far, that I should have been the bigger person. That family is supposed to forgive and help each other. And maybe you're right by some moral standard. But I spent a year remembering what it felt like to drive 6 hours through a blizzard to surprise people I loved, only to have them laugh in my face. I spent a year knowing that while I was building a business, they were actively working to sabotage it. I spent a year watching Scarlett's Instagram posts, positioning herself as superior while undermining my professional reputation. They didn't just reject me that Christmas. They tried to destroy me. And the only reason they wanted me back was because they needed something from me. So no, I don't feel bad. I feel vindicated. I feel powerful. I feel like I gave them exactly what they deserved. They made me stand in -30 weather while they mocked me through a window. Now they get to stand at my gate while I ignore them through a security camera. They wanted to teach me about success and failure. Lesson learned. And now I'm teaching it back. Class dismissed. Welcome to Hidden Lies.